the party, the so-called party of life. This, the Republican Party has been calling themselves this for years and years and years. Kevin McCarthy has a new idea out about what he thinks he can get out of Democrats in Congress in exchange for not crashing America's credit worldwide. Now, this is particularly interesting. You know, this whole debt ceiling thing. You know, the 14th Amendment says that the creditworthiness, the good, you know, full faith and trust of the United States government shall not be questioned. And this law that was passed back in the 1950s establishing a debt ceiling, maybe it actually went back to the 1920s. Actually, I think it goes back to World War I now that I think about it. Anyhow, this law, in my opinion, is just completely unconstitutional. And my suggestion, if I was advising President Biden, would be just ignore it. You know, just ignore it. You don't have to get Congress's approval to pay checks. That's, you know, and let them litigate it. Let them take it at the Supreme Court. I find it hard to believe even the crazed right-wingers on the Supreme Court would go along with this. But in any case, because all it is authorizing the government to write the checks to pay the bills that they've already incurred, which, you know, as I said, the 14th Amendment says you must do. And that's the amendment to the Constitution. But anyhow, Kevin McCarthy thinks he's got something here. And that he's going to use it to beat up Joe Biden. And what does he want to do? He wants to throw millions of families off food stamps. He wants to end the additional funding to the IRS to audit high-income people. Best estimate, about $5 trillion a decade is stolen from you and me and the federal government by the morbidly rich. And the IRS has not been able to audit them for about a decade because of cuts to the IRS budget during the George W. Bush administration and then even larger cuts during the Donald Trump administration. So they basically restored that funding, which, by the way, has sped up the speed with which, you know, people are getting their tax refunds now. So Kevin McCarthy wants to slow down your tax refunds, too. But anyhow, he says that, oh, and he also wants to make sure that not even $10,000 goes to students who have student loans. He wants to end Joe Biden's program to cancel student debt. Now, that is on hold right now before the Supreme Court because a group of Republican attorneys general from the states had sued saying, no, we want our students in these red states to be in debt. We want them to stay in debt. That's a good thing, don't you know? Republicans will tell you. But what's interesting is that this proposal comes out the same week that the Journal of the American Medical Association published a brand new study finding that the fourth leading cause of death in America is poverty. We have the worst poverty of any developed country on earth. And it's entirely because of Republican policies. Most of it is happening in red states. Red states are the poorest in the United States. And, you know, they have the worst problems with poverty. But the study was just absolutely unambiguous. I'm quoting from the study. I had to pay the American Medical Association yesterday $40 to buy a copy of this study. But it looked good enough that I thought, oh, hey, check this out. So anyhow, here's what the study says, and I'm quoting. Current poverty. Now, first of all, they differentiate between current poverty and cumulative poverty. Current poverty is if in the last year, according to their metric, if in the last year your income was below the median for the United States. So there is a point where half of America makes more than a certain amount, half of America makes less than a certain amount. It's not half of the people. It's probably 80% of Americans make less than the median amount. But in any case, and that's just a guess on my part, but you know, it's certainly more than 50%. But in any case, if you were below the median income of the United States for the last year, then you are considered to be in current poverty. If your income was below the median poverty below the median income level in the United States for the past 10 years, then you are experiencing what they call cumulative poverty. So now that we've established the terms, let me read to you the quotes, these two two sentences or two paragraphs from this article in this week's Journal of the American Medical Association. Current poverty, that's in the last year you were below the median, current poverty was associated with greater mortality than major causes such as accidents, lower respiratory diseases, and strokes. In 2019, current poverty was also associated with greater mortality than many far more visible causes. Poverty caused 10 times as many deaths as homicide, 4.7 times as many deaths as firearms, 3.9 times as many deaths as suicides, and 2.6 times as many deaths as drug overdoses. Now, if you are in cumulative poverty, in other words, if you've been living on less than the median income in the United States for 10 years or longer, this is what they had to say, quote, cumulative poverty was associated with approximately 60% greater mortality than current poverty. Hence, cumulative poverty was associated with greater mortality than even obesity and dementia. Heart disease, cancer, and smoking were the only causes or risks with greater mortality than cumulative poverty. They concluded that, quote, poverty should be considered a major risk factor for death in the United States. One limitation of this study is that our estimates may be conservative about the number of deaths associated with poverty. So they're estimating about 750,000 Americans die of poverty in the United States every year. So, you know, and by the way, this is hitting Republicans where they live because the worst poverty in the United States is in red states. So what have Republicans done about this poverty that is whacking them upside the head, or at least their people? It's not whacking the Republican politicians. They're rolling in dough from the right-wing billionaires. Well, they've repeatedly fought efforts to raise the $7.25 minimum wage, which would be over $15 if adjusted for inflation, over $25 if adjusted for worker productivity gains. They blocked passage of the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which would allow workers to join a union by signing a card. They cut funding to school lunches by 40%. They refused to extend the child tax credit, which lifted millions of families with kids out of poverty. They denied health care to low-income working families in almost a dozen Republican-controlled states, refusing to expand Medicaid. They sued the Biden administration all the way to the Supreme Court to block just a $10,000 reduction in student debt. They responded to the slaughter of school children in Tennessee by proposing legislation making it illegal for grieving parents to sue gun sellers. They challenged legislative efforts by Democrats to slow climate change by citing phony BS science promoted by the fossil fuel industry and Marjorie Taylor Greene. They demanded cuts in Social Security and proposed raising the retirement age to 70 for people who are currently over 50 years old, under 50 years old. And they support the ongoing privatization of Medicare through George W. Bush's corrupt Medicare Advantage private insurance scam. It's amazing. I mean, the American Rescue Plan, President Biden, when he took office, we passed the American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion that expanded child tax credits and expanded access to Medicaid throughout 2021 and most of 2022. It lifted an estimated 12 million people, including 5.6 million children, out of poverty. As CBPP economists noted, quote, the rescue plan may turn out to be the most effective single piece of legislation for reducing annual poverty since 1935. It worked brilliantly, and it worked particularly well in red states where poverty is a real crisis. So what did the Republicans do? They blocked reauthorization of it. So now, in fact, it's hitting us right now. It started hitting us last month. People in red states are being thrown off Medicaid and food stamps. I mean, this is just incredible. Biden's policies brought Trump's 14.7% unemployment down to 3.6%. And what's going on now? Jerome Powell, lifelong Republican, is trying to jack unemployment back up again. As Ron Wyden said yesterday, my senator, he said, Republicans manufactured this debt ceiling crisis, and Speaker McCarthy's proposal to get out of it would destroy jobs, worsen health care, increase hunger, hurt the climate, and make millions of American families poorer. But the so-called party of life, it turns out, doesn't give a damn about actual human life unless it has a net worth of over $500 million. Is America fed up with Ron DeSantis? Did Fox so-called news pull the trigger on Ralph Yarl? I'll tell you about those stories on the other side of the break.